The jungle was alive with sounds that didn't belong to anything found in human textbooks. Low, thrumming growls, clicking whispers from the dark canopy above, and a strange, almost musical vibration that seemed to pulse directly against the skin. A misty green fog hung low over the ground, swirling like a living thing between gnarled roots and rocks shaped like forgotten gods. Every breath tasted of iron and flowers, and blood. She crouched low in the shadows of a massive, moss-encrusted boulder. Her blue-tinted skin flushed a deeper shade from exhaustion. Her long golden hair, normally braided in warrior's loops, was a wild tangle down her back, stuck with leaves and glittering spores. Her ears, long and delicately pointed, twitched at every distant sound. The battered plates of her armor clung stubbornly to her slender frame, but several sections had been ripped away, exposing cuts and dark bruises on her arms and thighs. She adjusted the thin, scorched blade in her hand, ready to die fighting if it came to that. And it was coming to that. The monster hunting her was no common predator. It was a thing birthed from nightmares, all fanged maws and rippling sinew, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground with each deliberate step. Somewhere behind her, it bellowed, a sound so loud and guttural it made the stones themselves seem to shudder in fear. She clenched her jaw and refused to let the instinctual terror show on her face. She had been trained for this. She had survived worse. Probably. Still, she allowed herself a single, whispered curse in her native tongue, an intricate insult involving someone's mother, an overgrown beetle, and poor spatial reasoning. It didn't help. As she tensed to spring, prepared to make one last stand, the underbrush to her right exploded in a burst of leaves and startled shrieks. She spun, blade raised, and nearly ran the human straight through. He was an absolute mess. His dark brown hair stuck out in frantic spikes, his shirt was ripped nearly in half, and his once sturdy boots were held together with some kind of sticky sap that smelled suspiciously of sulfur. In one hand he wielded a blaster pistol that looked like it had lost a fight with a gravity well. In the other, a battered shield rigged from parts of what might have once been a food processor. "Oh good, you're not dead yet," he gasped, giving her a lopsided grin that somehow managed to be both infuriating and weirdly charming. Was worried I'd missed my grand heroic entrance? Before she could decide whether to gut him or just ignore him, the monster roared again, closer this time. He barely glanced over his shoulder. Right. Less chatting, more not dying. Without waiting for her to agree, or even blink, he charged straight toward the beast, shouting something utterly incomprehensible but deeply enthusiastic. It took her brain a full second to catch up before she cursed again, flinging herself after him. The battle that followed could charitably be described as chaos. The human fought like a drunk poet, wild, erratic, and with a tendency to shout questionable battle cries like, "This one's for planet Earth, you overgrown meatloaf." His blaster sputtered in his hand, sometimes firing, sometimes just making sad little wheezing noises. The shield he carried deflected exactly one attack before shattering into shrapnel. He didn't seem to mind. If anything, he laughed, an open, reckless sound that echoed madly across the jungle. She, by contrast, fought with precision, striking with brutal efficiency at the monster's vulnerable joints and tender underbelly. But no matter how many wounds they inflicted, it wasn't enough. The creature's hide was too thick, its rage too boundless. It swatted at them with massive gnarled limbs, gouging trenches in the ground where they barely managed to dodge. It should have been a death sentence, it almost was, until the human, panting and grinning like an idiot, yanked a small orb from his belt. "Hey, ugly!" he shouted, and somehow the monster actually paused, turning its baleful gaze on him. He tossed the orb straight into the creature's mouth. There was a brief, terrible silence. Then the orb exploded in a spectacular cloud of neon pink foam. The monster let out a strangled noise, something between a roar and a very undignified yelp, as the foam rapidly expanded, hardening into a thick, sticky cocoon. Its furious struggles only got it more entangled. Within seconds, it was mummified in a lumpy mass of glowing pink, vibrating faintly with its outraged growls. The human leaned on his knees, gasping for breath, and offered her a triumphant, boyish grin. Got that at a discount. Said it was for crowd control. Guess it works on angry meatballs too. She stared at him, then at the monster, then back at him. You are, she said slowly, in heavily accented but precise galactic standard, the stupidest, luckiest creature I have ever witnessed. He beamed. Thanks. I try to excel at something. For the first time in hours, maybe days, she felt a laugh bubble up, sharp and involuntary. She smothered it with a glare, but the damage was done. They moved quickly after that, in case the foam didn't hold, or the jungle decided to throw something even worse at them. As they picked their way through the undergrowth, he started talking again. A constant stream of nonsense about Earth food. You haven't lived till you've had a cheeseburger, or indigestion, really. And the questionable reliability of navigation beacons. Despite herself, she listened. Despite herself, she smiled. By the time the twin moons rose overhead, painting the jungle in silver and violet light, they had found a relatively safe hollow among the roots of an enormous tree. She inspected the perimeter with sharp professional caution while he built a small, sputtering fire using bits of scavenged tech and what looked suspiciously like socks. So, he said, sprawling beside the fire with a satisfied grunt, are you going to tell me your name, or should I just call you Blue? She narrowed her eyes at him. My name would break your primitive tongue. He grinned wider. Challenge accepted. After a long pause, during which the only sound was the crackle of fire and the distant mournful wail of some unseen creature, she relented. Selairen, she said softly. He repeated it, mangling the pronunciation horribly, but with enough heart that she didn't correct him. Selairen, he said, smiling like it was a word of great importance. Nice to meet you. I'm Nathan. Nathan. The name was simple, unadorned, like him, like the strange, stubborn, impossible hope he seemed to carry with him, even into a place like this. Selairen leaned back against the roots, exhausted but, against all odds, alive. Beside her, Nathan launched into another absurd story about battling giant spiders on a mining colony. Never trust anything with more than 6 legs. That's just greedy. And she found herself listening, actually listening, to the rise and fall of his voice. The monster was beaten, for now. The jungle was vast and deadly. Their chances of survival were slim. But the night didn't feel so heavy anymore. Not while Nathan's laughter stirred the air. Not while Selairen let herself believe, for just a little while longer, that 2 lost souls could carve a place for themselves even in the cruel heart of an alien world. Morning came not gently, but with a shriek. Selairen was on her feet in an instant, blade flashing, eyes scanning the misty jungle for threats. Nathan, by contrast, flailed his way out of sleep with the grace of a falling log, grabbing a stick and waving it wildly. What? Where? Who stole my sandwich? He yelled, before blinking around dazed. The shriek came again, high-pitched and eerily human, except it seemed to be coming from a tree. Specifically, a tree that had sprouted what looked like 100 tiny mouths along its bark, all of them wailing in hideous chorus. Selairen sheathed her blade with a sigh, so heavy it could have flattened a lesser man. It's just a screamwood. Territory marker. Nathan, clutching his chest dramatically, slumped against a root. Oh, good. I thought it was my ex-girlfriend coming to yell at me across dimensions. Selairen arched one delicate brow. You survived a relationship? He gave her a wounded look. I'm very lovable, especially to plants with abandonment issues, apparently. With the screamwood's noise fading into the background hum of the jungle, they packed what little they had, a handful of scavenged supplies, Nathan's questionable weaponry, and a map Selairen had pieced together from memory and the scattered scraps of her damaged tech. Their goal was clear enough. Find higher ground, scout the land, and locate either Nathan's crashed ship or anything resembling civilization. The jungle wasn't inclined to make it easy. Towering trees twisted into impossible shapes overhead, their leaves so broad and heavy they formed living ceilings. Strange creatures scampered through the shadows, some with too many legs, others with none but an alarming number of teeth. They crossed rivers that glowed faintly from within, the water carrying microscopic organisms that blinked like distant stars. Nathan, ever the optimist, or the fool, treated each new horror like a tourist at an amusement park. "Ooh, look! A glow piranha! Think it's friendly?" he asked, leaning dangerously close to the river. Seliren hooked her arm around his collar and yanked him back without a word. Moments later, a fish the size of his forearm launched itself out of the water, rows of needle-like teeth snapping at the air. Nathan watched it splash back down with wide eyes. Not friendly, got it. Mental note, stop trusting anything that looks remotely adorable. They trekked for hours, weaving through mazes of thorn vines and fields of flowers that screamed if touched. Nathan accidentally triggered a full chorus, of course. Seliren moved with a predator's grace, always alert, always efficient. Nathan followed with the chaotic energy of a man on his third cup of bad coffee, tripping over roots and occasionally breaking into impromptu dance moves to avoid stepping on spiky-looking bugs. Despite his antics, or maybe because of them, the oppressive weight of fear seemed to lift a little. Seliren found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. The way he grinned at every small success, the way he shook off every setback. He was impossibly irritating. He was impossibly comforting. The high ground turned out to be a ridge of jagged black stone, crusted over with luminescent moss. From the summit, they could see far across the jungle, a rippling sea of alien green stretching to a misty horizon. Somewhere to the northeast, something glinted, metallic and broken. Nathan whooped and threw his arms in the air. "That's gotta be it. Part of my ship. Told you I had a good sense of direction." Seliren gave him a long, unimpressed look. "You got us lost twice," and walked into a carnivorous flower. In my defense, it looked like a very welcoming flower. Still, the sight of the wreckage was a small victory. They had a heading, a purpose, hope. That night, they camped beneath the twisted branches of a low tree that smelled faintly of cinnamon and battery acid. Nathan insisted on trying to cook, producing something he called field stew, using local vegetation, and something from a ration pack labeled in 6 different warning languages. Seliren watched warily as he stirred the pot, humming off-key. "What exactly is in that?" "A little bit of everything," he said cheerfully. "You gotta be open-minded. Could be delicious. Could be an existential threat to your gastrointestinal system. Life's an adventure." When he offered her a steaming bowl, she accepted it with the solemnity of one accepting their fate. The first bite was an experience. Textures fought for dominance in her mouth. Flavors she couldn't even name exploded and recoiled, like dueling plasma currents. She chewed slowly, glaring at him the entire time. Nathan grinned. "See? It's growing on you, like a fungus." Seliren set the bowl down with exaggerated care. "If I die from this, I am haunting you. Forever." He clinked his own bowl against hers in a mock toast. "Best date I've had in years." The words caught her off guard, sending a strange flutter through her chest she didn't quite know how to name. Humor, maybe, or something heavier, something warmer, something she wasn't ready to admit. Later, as Nathan snored softly beneath a makeshift blanket of leaves, after adamantly insisting they were cozy, despite all evidence to the contrary, Seliren sat awake, blade across her knees. The stars above were unfamiliar, constellations twisted into impossible shapes. This world was not her home. Nathan was not her kind. And yet, for the first time since exile, she didn't feel entirely alone. A soft rustle caught her ear, and she tensed, only to relax a moment later when a small, round creature rolled into view, blinking its many eyes in sleepy confusion. She watched it shuffle off into the brush, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Maybe survival wasn't just about fighting. Maybe, just maybe, it was about finding someone you could laugh with between battles. Someone who reminded you that even in a universe full of monsters, there was still room for foolishness, for stubborn hope. Seliren adjusted her grip on the blade, her gaze drifting to Nathan's sleeping form. Tomorrow would be another battle, another chase, another day of running and fighting, and maybe, if they were very lucky, surviving. But tonight, in this fleeting, fragile peace, she allowed herself to believe that survival was not the same as being alone, and that maybe, just maybe, The universe had not yet given up all its better surprises. The final stretch of their journey was brutal, unforgiving. The once vibrant jungle had given way to jagged cliffs and dark craggy rocks that loomed like sentinels over the horizon. The wreckage of Nathan's ship, a twisted heap of metal and melted components, lay at the base of the cliff. It looked less like a ship and more like a corpse, a once proud vessel that had been torn apart by the very planet that had once promised them survival. Saliren stood at the edge of the ravine, her arms crossed, her eyes tracing the ruins below. The weight of their struggle seemed to settle upon her shoulders, heavier than any armor. Nathan stood beside her, scanning the wreckage with a frown that tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Not exactly what I had in mind for a reunion with my ship," he said, forcing a chuckle. Saliren glanced at him, her lips quirking despite herself. "I was hoping for more heroic escape and less crash landing in 1,000 pieces." Nathan sighed dramatically. "Well, you know me, always going above and beyond." They both fell silent for a moment. The air between them felt different now, charged with something they had built over the long days of survival. A bond forged in fire and laughter in the trenches of their shared struggles. They weren't just two strangers anymore. They were something more. "Do you think we can fix it?" Saliren asked, her voice unusually soft. Nathan scratched his head, then gave a half-hearted shrug. "Well, I've got duct tape, optimism, and a lot of vague recollections about how to pilot a ship. What could possibly go wrong?" Saliren shook her head with a sigh. "I swear, you're going to be the end of me." He grinned. "I thought I already was." The familiar bickering made her stomach tighten in an unexpected, bittersweet way. She had thought her life was over when she crash-landed on this cursed world, hunted by monsters and forced into endless days of running and hiding. But now, with Nathan by her side, the future didn't feel so empty. It felt possible. They descended the cliff with careful steps, Nathan occasionally slipping on loose rocks, but always catching himself with a string of colorful curses. By the time they reached the wreckage, they were both covered in dust, sweat, and bruises, but neither of them minded. They had seen far worse. Nathan immediately set to work, rummaging through the twisted remains of his ship. Saliren, ever the tactician, stood watch, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The planet had not given up its hostilities just because they had earned a moment of peace. But in this moment, Saliren allowed herself to feel the smallest bit of hope. After what felt like hours, Nathan finally emerged from the wreckage, holding what appeared to be an ancient, rusted tool. "I found the interstellar jump drive," he called out with a triumphant grin, though the device looked about as reliable as a paper airplane in a storm. Saliren raised an eyebrow. "You do realize that piece is likely the one thing that made your ship crash in the first place?" Nathan winked. "Well, that's one way of looking at it. I prefer to think of it as a challenge." She couldn't help the dry smile that tugged at her lips. "You're impossible." Nathan threw his arms in the air. "Impossible is my middle name. Actually, it's not, but I've always thought it would be cool." Saliren's laugh caught her off guard. She hadn't expected it, not after everything they had been through. But there it was, laughter, light and free, the kind that had been buried under layers of fear and responsibility. It felt like a release. They worked together side by side for hours, Saliren keeping watch, Nathan scrounging through the wreckage, trying to make sense of the mangled components. It was a miracle they hadn't been attacked by anything yet, but it didn't take long for them to realize the truth of it. The planet had other plans. As they reassembled parts of the broken ship, the ground suddenly shook beneath them. A distant roar rumbled through the air, followed by a sharp crackling noise. Saliren's heart lurched in her chest. "We've got company," she said, voice low and tense. Nathan glanced at her, a grin plastered across his face despite the imminent threat. "What? Do you think I was done entertaining you with alien horror?" Saliren's eyes narrowed, and she gripped her blade tighter. "Focus, Nathan." A massive shape burst from the jungle, a creature more horrifying than anything they had seen so far, its body armored in thick, gleaming scales, and its eyes burning with an unnatural hunger. The ground trembled as it advanced, its mouth dripping with saliva as it snarled. "Okay, that's new," Nathan said. as if it were a minor inconvenience. New and more lethal, Celarin muttered. But as the creature charged toward them, something changed in her. The fear that had once gnawed at her insides, the constant anxiety of being alone, being hunted, it was gone. She was no longer just a soldier surviving in a hostile world. She was something more. Someone who could fight, who could protect, who could be a part of something bigger. Nathan didn't wait for instructions. He immediately reached for the blaster at his side, firing wildly, even though the shot seemed more likely to singe his own eyebrows than harm the creature. But Celarin wasn't laughing. She was moving with purpose, calculating, understanding the situation in ways that Nathan couldn't even comprehend. Together they fought, he with his blaster, she with her blade. The monster swiped at them, its claws ripping through the air. But they were faster, smarter. Celarin moved like a shadow, ducking and striking where it counted. Nathan, bless his foolish soul, distracted the beast with his erratic movements, providing just enough of an opening for Celarin to land the final blow. Piercing the creature's heart with a sharp, clean strike. It fell with a thud, the jungle eerily silent once more. Nathan slumped to the ground, breathing heavily. Well, I didn't die. That's a start. Celarin wiped her blade clean, her chest rising and falling with exertion. You're lucky to be alive. Yeah, he said with a grin, but I had the best partner. That makes me the luckiest. Her gaze softened for a moment, and she allowed herself to admit what had been growing between them. This partnership, this connection. She had come to this planet with only the hope of survival. Now as she looked at him, she realized that survival for her meant something more. It meant finding someone to fight with, to share the weight of this strange universe with. As the sun began to set, casting a soft golden light over the wreckage and the silent jungle beyond, Nathan stood, brushing off his knees. I'm guessing this is the part where we repair the ship and get the hell out of here? Celarin nodded, her voice firm. Yes, but we're doing it together. No more running. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a battle they were going to lose. It felt like a journey, one they were taking together towards something new, something unknown, something that didn't just belong to a broken ship or a planet full of monsters, something that belonged to them, and maybe, just maybe, it was enough.